Bom, bom dia a todos. Bom dia, professor Passas. Dando prosseguimento ao nosso seminário, seguimos com a palestra magna do professor Nikos Passas. Nikos Passas, que é nascido na Grécia, palestrante TED Talk, coordenou diversas iniciativas nas Nações Unidas, na UNODC, sobretudo sobre a Convenção da ONU contra a Corrupção. É um professor em grandes universidades, em diversos continentes, né? Professor da Universidade de Pequim, de Genebra, enfim, tive a honra de assistir aulas com o professor Passas na IACA, né? Academia Internacional Anticorrupção em Viena, professor da Academia Anticorrupção da Índia, expert da Iniciativa Global contra o Crime Organizado Transnacional e atualmente professor na Northeastern University, em Boston, nos Estados Unidos. Bom, o currículo do professor Passas realmente o precede e é uma grande honra recebemos o professor Passas aqui no evento da Sicla, Seminário Internacional de Combate à Lavagem de Dinheiro, em apoio do CEAF e do CAUET. Bom, o professor Passas vai tratar de um tema em que tem larga experiência, abordando aspectos dos fluxos de ativos financeiros internacionais e a lavagem de dinheiro transnacional. É um tema muito relevante para nós, do Ministério Público e do sistema de justiça, de uma forma geral, a partir do momento em que a gente vê que a lavagem de dinheiro cada vez mais deixa de ser a ocultação e a transferência física de ativos de um lugar para o outro, né? Foi-se o tempo em que recuperar ativos de lavagem de dinheiro seria acompanhar dinheiro no colchão ou em bunkers escondidos, enfim, como a gente vê em alguns filmes mais antigos, e hoje assume uma característica eminentemente tecnológica de circulação de ativos, que não observa as fronteiras físicas dos estados, né, dos países, enfim, e busca jurisdições mais flexíveis ou mais propícias para as atividades de lavagem de dinheiro. Enfim, o professor Passas tem mais de 230 artigos científicos publicados, livros, relatórios técnicos em 15 línguas. É uma honra ter o professor Passas aqui. Eu vou tomar liberdade para me referir ao professor Passas em inglês para recebê-lo, e, na sequência, passo a palavra ao nosso palestrante. Hello, Professor Passas, and welcome to the International Seminar on Combating Money Laundering. I have just introduced your amazing curriculum and professional achievements. You know that it's an honor to host you, Professor, and a pleasure to listen to your perspectives on illicit financial flows and transnational money laundering. I'd like to remind you that we provided simultaneous translations for our audience, our Brazilian audience, and that a recorded version of this webinar will be available after the session. And at the end of the session, we may pose a couple of audience questions, if you don't mind. So please, Professor Passas, thank you very much for attending the session, and please enlighten us.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words and the introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me to your meeting today. And thank you to everyone who is making time to attend. So today I would like to discuss illicit flows, financial and commercial, and how the overall anti-money laundering effort that we are making globally is actually falling short of expectations because we do not pay sufficient attention to imports, exports, and what illicit financial flows they also hide. So the basic point is that we spent a lot of resources creating an infrastructure for financial vigilance, but trade, commerce, imports and exports continues to be non-transparent. We do not pay sufficient policy attention. Resources are not enough. And as a result, is extraordinarily vulnerable, not only for commercial illegal flows, goods that go to places they're not supposed to go at prices that are not legal in violation of sanctions or other regimes, quotas, and so on, but they are also obscuring financial flows that can be any type of crime, as I will explain in a few minutes. So essentially, there are 4 global flows that the proper financial vigilance is supposed to pay attention to. Financial, where most of our effort is concentrated. Information flows, where there is a lot of initiative resources, and we are trying to cover intelligence and other negative stories and information flows. Trade, imports, exports, and that is where we are not doing enough. And also services. I will give only one example because services is a big chapter for anti-money laundering that we can cover at some point in the future. But the key point of this presentation is that despite the very extensive and expensive infrastructure that we have put in place to regulate illegal financial flows, the current regimes are open to abuse and are being abused to the tune of billions and trillions of dollars. One example is how illicit or informal financial flows move, and then I will highlight how these intersect with imports and exports. So in a few sentences, this is the universe that I have been studying for the last 3 decades, the informal value transfer mechanisms. And these range from very low-tech physical transportation, the ordinary courier type of transportation of funds from one place to another, all the way to very sophisticated ways, digital payments, cryptocurrencies, trade, and the illicit use of correspondent accounts. The one category here that I want to spend a little bit time on is the compensatory payments, the kind of Havala, black market peso, doleros, and that kind of transactions that we can spend a few slides on, in-kind payments and services. And let me give you one example of a service arrangement that hides illegal financial flows. Let's say that I am a broker for tourism. So I arrange for you to go and visit, let's say, India and Taj Mahal. And I take your money and I put it on the side. I contact my counterpart in India, who agrees to welcome you there, to take care of all of the expenses, food, excursions, drinks, and everything, and make sure that you have a good time. I take your reais in Brazil. They are spending their rupees in order to take care of you in India. At the end of the holiday period, I owe him a lot of money because he has taken care of a lot of tourism that I sent from Brazil. And I owe him the actual cost and the profit, the fee that he would charge me. And at this point, he says, do not send me your money here to India. Here is an account that I have in Dubai, or here is an account that I have in the United States in New York. Please put the money there. Or I have an account in Sao Paulo. I have an account in Sao Paulo. Put the money in Sao Paulo. I want to have it in reais. In this case, the regulators are going to see a transaction from Brazil to New York or Brazil to Dubai, or inside Brazil, a domestic transaction that goes to from Rio or from one part of the country, Belo Horizonte, it goes to Sao Paulo. But what this hides is the actual transfer of substantial amounts of money from India to that place. Because instead of me sending him the money that I owe him to India, I transferred it for him to another destination. So the reason I depict the different methods in this way is that I have not seen an illegal network of operators use only one of these methods. They use multiple. So it's important to understand the mechanics of each of them and how they intersect. So let's start with the Havala type of transactions, which are very similar to what Cuevas or Arbolitos or the black market exchange for pesos or the doleros sometimes use. So I am in the United States and I want to send money to my cousin in Pakistan. I find a local intermediary, I give him $1,000, and he sends payment instructions to his counterpart in Karachi so that my cousin can pick it up or have it delivered to his place. The payment instructions go by fax, by email, and sometimes now they use Telegram, WhatsApp, or other apps for communications. And the transaction can take place within minutes or at most 24 hours. Now, it is not only me who wants to send money to a cousin in Pakistan. So here at the bottom left, we have a lot of, let's say, migrant workers who want to send money to their families. So you have a lot of dollars that want to become rupees. On the other end, what you have is traders in Pakistan who want to pay for goods that they will import into Pakistan from outside. So they have to pay for these. They have rupees, but they need to make the payments in dollars. So you have a lot of rupees that need to become dollars for the importation of goods from the United States or other parts of the world. So the Western banking system is going to have this kind of crisscrossing transactions, and every time the banks and financial intermediaries are going to charge something so they can make a profit too. What the informal remittance systems, the Havala system, does is actually take that out. And the intermediary, the broker or Havaladar in the United States will take the dollars of the migrants and will send the payment instructions to his colleague in Karachi. He will also receive payment transactions from his colleagues to the United States. So what is going to happen in practice is that I take all these dollars that want to go to Pakistan, and I receive the payment instructions from my counterpart in Karachi. So what I do is that I use these dollars to make the payments for the exports in the United States. My counterpart will receive my payment instructions for the families of the migrants, and he will take the rupees of the importers and distribute them to the families of the migrant workers. So the dollars will stay dollars, the rupees will remain rupees. And the speed of the transactions is going to be very fast, and there is no need to convert from one currency to another as long as these flows are symmetrical. But they never are, because very often there is more money going into one direction, or they're not going only to Karachi, but they're going to many parts of Pakistan or to other destinations. So the bottom line is that there will be an asymmetrical part for which there is a need to settle up. And the settlement will take place every week, every month, or every year, depending on the relationship between the two intermediaries in big financial center jurisdictions, like like New York, like London, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, Delhi, etc. So if at the end of the month I owe money because my beneficiaries received more money than what they sent, then a payment is going to be made to an account in the US or in Dubai, wherever my counterpart tells me to send the money. If I am owed money, then I will withdraw money from these accounts to my account. So what international transactions appear on a regulator's monitoring screen is only an incomplete picture because it is the asymmetrical part of financial flows. And B, they're also consolidated because they are between intermediaries. So you do not necessarily know who is the sender and who is the recipient. In other words, you do not know who sent money to whom. This is an example of what a payment instruction looks like so that you can see what happens at the end of a business day. I take all the requests for payments, I put them in a sequence, I give them a sequential number, which is the reference number that we go to if there is a delay or a mistake. And here included is information about the sender, the recipient, the amount of money, and the telephone number so that a contact can be made. Sometimes there is an urgent request, so a single instruction is going to be faxed or emailed or texted, and they will say, "Dear Mohammed, please pay Baba Singh or his daughter this amount of Indian rupees, 950,000, right?" So important in this messaging is this part here, if you can see the token number. This is very important because what it tells to dear Mohammed, the other end, is that Baba Singh or his daughter will come to you with a 10 Indian rupee that has this serial number on it. That is a unique note, and that is the customer identification process. Mohammed takes that 10 Indian rupee note as evidence that he gave the cash to the intended beneficiary and keeps it as a receipt so that if there is a question about who received what and when, he has that evidence. And the problem here is that Singh is a very common name, and anyone can show up as long as they have the correct Indian rupee note, they will be able to get the money. So that is what freaks out law enforcement, because they may not know who actually received the money. The key, however, is that in these informal markets, Mohammed knows very well the local market and knows very well who Baba Singh is and his daughter and the relatives, or he can very easily find out. In other words, what he does have, if he really wants to do, is the capacity to work with us. And if we have questions to ask from the control side, he can say, yes, I can tell you who Baba Singh is, who received this amount of money. So there is no easy transparency here, but what the key is, the benefit is that there is traceability. If Mohammed wants to work with law enforcement, he can be very helpful. And these are the different kinds of records that are kept. As you can see, I am operating, let's say, out of Boston, and I'm sending money to many parts of India. So for every part of India, I have a running balance. This is actually an example from the United Kingdom. So the amounts are in British pounds. Then they get converted in dollars because the settlement takes place in US dollars. And the amounts are also in rupees because that is what is recorded on the Indian side. So at the end of the day, there is a balance of plus or minus, depending on whether I owe money to that person in each province or he owes me money. And if we continue operations on a regular basis, we may take weeks or months to settle, as long as we have an understanding that the settlement is going to take place in order to zero out the balance. Similar kinds of ledgers are kept by Nigerians, as you can see in this particular case, less sophisticated, but with basically the same information. This is an Arab Havala case, which was in fact a terrorism finance case. There was money that went from Yemen and Kuwait to Africa in order to finance the bombing of the Nairobi embassies of the of the United States. And it was the $1,000. Now, the importance of this is that even at the time, this happened before 9/11, before all the regulatory requirements for people to keep records and so on. The records, that's the important point, were available because Havala operators always keep records, because otherwise they cannot run the business. They will not be able to, they send and receive money. They send and receive payment instructions in the hundreds of thousands of dollars daily. So in order to run the business, they have to have records. And this is, again, a different part of this transaction that you can see was kept even before there was a formal requirement for people to keep these records. Now, the settlement, as I mentioned earlier, can be done through wire transfers or through these reciprocal payments, where you make payments on behalf of the counterpart that you have in another place. Other ways of settling are physical transportation with couriers, but trade is another very important method. In this under-invoicing example, I'm going to send $100,000 from London to South Asia. So the basic idea is that I'm going to send an invoice for computers that are invoiced for $150,000. I send the invoice, I receive the payment, and I ship the goods. The difference is that the goods are actually worth $250,000. So my counterpart takes these computers, sells them in the market, makes his profit, and he sells them at the right market price. So he makes the extra $100,000 that I wanted to transfer to him. So in this example, the problem with customs is that the physical inspections can only take part for a tiny proportion of the trade. Otherwise, we block the trade and things get delayed too much. So we have to select 1-2% at most of containers. Let's say that in this example, with the misinvoiced, with the under-invoiced computers, we selected random for inspection. We open the container, we open the parcel, and what we see there is computers. Computers in the container, computers in the paperwork. What we do not have the time or inclination to do is open the packages, plug them in, turn them on, and find out that the software is more expensive, or the memory is more recent, or the chips more sophisticated, therefore the value is much higher. So even in the event of a physical inspection, unless we have intelligence or another way of identify the misinvoicing, we can't smell the rat. We cannot see it as a suspicious transaction. So there are multiple examples of how these things happen. In a real case of Havala plus trade from India, this was a factory that was making bicycle parts. It was charging $30 per item, invoicing $30 per item, and exporting them in the first instance to Dubai. On the basis of the invoices, it was receiving the funds, and from Dubai, the goods were going around the world. The problem, though, was that the real value of the parts was $1.20. So the difference was the excess money. If you remember, Dubai is one of the places that is used for the settling of Havala transactions. So what we wanted was a legitimate reason on paper to send a lot of money from Dubai to India. So this misinvoicing justifies excess amounts of cash going from Dubai to India. And in India, the guy who has the bicycle part also runs an Havala place business, and he distributes the money to people. But in addition to that, he commits subsidy fraud, because India subsidizes exports in order to promote Indian business, and it pays subsidies to exporters on the basis of the invoices that they present. But these were inflated invoices. So he commits subsidy fraud and cashes in from the Indian government. He receives the excess cash from Dubai. He is very liquid. And whenever he receives payment instructions to give the money of the families of migrant workers, he is flush in cash. He's always good. And as daily cash payment instructions come in, he's ready to make the payments immediately. So we started with a very simple set of transactions with two intermediaries and the sender and the recipient. But what we can see is that in real life, we have multiple destinations, different types of businesses, and third, fourth, fifth party settlement processes. And again, this is what creates anxiety for law enforcement, because they can see the record of an intermediary in their jurisdiction, but they do not know what happened on the other end. The point, however, is that these intermediaries, every transaction that they do with each other, they keep records of. The immediate counterparties, they need to know what business they did, when, and for how much. Otherwise, they can't run any business. So if you have a good cooperation arrangement with the intermediaries, you can go from node to node and actually follow the money. Where you lose the money or where the records are destroyed, that's a red flag, and it means that they have something to hide and you have something to investigate. But in most instances, intermediaries do not want to facilitate corruption or money laundering or terrorism finance, and they will work with you. This is how big Havala cases have facilitated the terrorism finance case of the Indian parliament, or the Mumbai bombing, or a big drug money laundering case that the Dubai police and the DEA did in Dubai. It was based on cooperation from Havala operators. In other words, you can easily, when you know whom to ask questions and what questions to ask and what records to ask for, you can turn a challenge for law enforcement into an asset, into an opportunity to solve problems. And the same thing happens with the black market peso exchange that we have primarily between Colombia and the United States, but multiple countries in this hemisphere are using it. What you have essentially is, on the one side, the cash pool of drug money that was because of the street sales in the United States. So you have drug money that wants to go, let's say, to Colombia. And then you have importers of goods in Colombia who have pesos, and they want to make payments in the United States for the goods that they want to bring into Colombia. So you have the intermediaries, the brokers in the middle, that essentially are going to take the drug money and pay the exporters, and they're going to take the legitimate traders' pesos and give it to the drug traffickers. So it's essentially the same mechanism that we have with Havala here. Now, turning back to the question of trade, I had a software program that I will tell you more about later on that I know was also used in Brazil for a number of years very successfully to control trade-based money laundering. In this case, and let me just back up a second and say that whenever you import something, a commodity to the United States, you have to declare in a form at least three things. Who is the ultimate consignee? Who is the importer of record? Who is putting this on their inventory, right? So who is the importer of record. You have to declare the origin and the provenance of things. Where did they come from? Or what was the origin? What was the transshipment point? And thirdly, what is the value? Okay, so here's what happens in practice, and I picked the diamond trade to illustrate this. I took 20 years worth of imports of diamonds into the United States of the biggest broker in the US. He did business of close to $22 billion, as you can see. But what I saw that was in 64% of the volume, he reported his own tax identification number as the importer of record, which cannot be true because he is a broker, he's an intermediary, he's not a trader. In another 9% of the trade, he gave somebody else's, not the true importer. In 2% of the cases, it was a fake tax number, 000001. And the real importers was only a quarter of the trade. So we're talking about billions of dollars of trade just from diamonds, just from the top broker, where we have nominee beneficial owner, which in itself is a felony offense under the US law. The second issue is you have to say where the diamonds are coming from. So these are the rough diamond import declarations in the United States. I have sanitized this a little bit, but the important point here is that with a straight face here, what is reported is that the point of origin and the point of transshipment for rough diamonds coming to the United States is Great Britain, which doesn't have diamond mines. There is no way that this can be true, right? And thirdly, here is the unit prices declared as the value of polished diamonds coming to the United States. And what you can see here is an extraordinary variety from single digits, a few dollars, stones that you found in the backyard, all the way to $100,000 each. What this tells you is how vulnerable the system is to misinvoicing here, because you can have 3 stones and you declare them for $10 each, so $30, when in fact they are $100,000 each. So what you did was brought into the United States $300,000 worth of diamonds without any problem. Why? Because customs are not specialists to tell whether it is really a $10 or $100,000 stone. They're not experts. Secondly, there is no revenue question if the diamonds are unmounted. Precious stones that are not mounted in a ring or a jewelry are duty-free into the United States. So there isn't really even a revenue question for them to investigate. So the bottom line here is that you have billions of dollars just of one commodity, diamonds, coming into the United States, where we do not know where the goods are coming from, we do not know how much they are worth, and we do not know who receives them. So much for trade transparency in the largest economy, right? Then you look at gold. This was a known terrorism finance case where the FARC was involved. AUC had been involved in gold transactions that were hiding gold exports. So this was the pattern that showed up when you look at these transactions. So I looked to see if I find the same pattern in other jurisdictions. And I found that this is what happened from the Netherlands Antilles. Now, Netherlands Antilles do not have any gold mines to export gold to the United States. That's a red flag. Then I saw that there was gold coming from Aruba. Aruba doesn't have gold mines. Trinidad and Tobago, the same thing. So here you have an easy way of finding irregularities worthy of investigation. Then I looked at tobacco trade. When you look at total exports, when something is exported from anywhere in the world, it has to be imported somewhere else in the world. So the total exports have to be equal of the total imports. That's not the case with tobacco, however. There is a 30% disparity between imports and exports. So I looked to see whether I can find more clues in what's going on in the United States. And one thing that struck me was that you have a rising trend of imports, more and more tobacco, in other words, coming into the United States, when actually people are smoking less. The smoking trends are lower. Why are we importing more tobacco when we smoke less? And then I saw that we have substantial imports from Japan and Switzerland of American-made tobacco. Now, Japan and Switzerland are not places where you have cheap labor and you outsource some of the production in order to bring things into the United States. So it doesn't make any sense for American-made goods to be imported from Japan or Switzerland. And then in particular from Switzerland, one set of transactions were out of a cruise liner. Well, the first problem is that Switzerland is landlocked. And the second one is that a cruise liner is not in the business of importing and exporting tobacco, it's tourism. Why would they be engaging in the importation of tobacco? So you have these red flags to follow. Then I looked at exports of tobacco from the US to different countries, all of them in the general area of Middle East, South Asia, and so on. And you can see the clear declining rates because people are smoking less. But then you look at Iran and they go higher. And then you look at Iran's import entity, the entity that deals with that, and you find that they are connected with the Revolutionary Guard. So what are they doing with excess imports in the general neighborhood? Obviously, they are reselling them. And what are they doing with that? I do not know, but given the sanctions regime that you have there and the efforts of the Iranian regime to circumvent the sanctions regime, you have a good reason to investigate and find out if there is something going on there. While some commodities attract a lot of attention, like diamonds, gold, and tobacco, I wanted to look at some totally innocent agricultural products like licorice. And here you can see that the gold price, the global price of licorice, is relatively stable over time at about 75 cents per item. You see the trade with Azerbaijan, and it is a normal distribution. Then you look at Afghanistan, and you see a few outliers where the price goes higher. You look at Pakistan, and you have even more outliers. You look at Syria, and you lose the pattern. Instead of 75 cents, they're being charged close to $30. Why is it that at the same time in the same neighborhood, someone is paying a multiple of the market price for the same commodity? So with this software, what one is able to do is click on these dots, the outliers, and immediately bring together from databases that can be brought together and integrated. Who is the importer? Who's the exporter? What are the values? What ongoing investigations do you have? Do they have a criminal record? Who else is using their telephone number? Who else is using this address? Do they have any convictions? Are there any suspicious activity reports filed on them? In other words, you can put your investigative file together in a very short order and target your investigations on the basis of the red flags that this system generates for you. Another way that you can see this is Mexico and gold imports in the United States. Blue is the price of scrap gold. Red is the price of pure gold. So pure gold is more expensive than scrap gold. And yet you have three outliers where someone is paying more for scrap gold than what they pay for pure gold. It doesn't make sense. But in general, the pattern is fairly clean. Where you lose the pattern is when you go to Colombia, where it is all over the place. And you can see that scrap gold very frequently fetches more money than pure gold. Look at the contrast between the two patterns. Again, you can visualize the red flags very easily, and you can find where the disparities are. Let's say that you export chickens to Colombia from the United States. And from the United States, the volume, so you have exports from Colombia, and they show 57 billion. You go to the equivalent statistics in the US to see how much of that actually arrived, and you see only 14 billion came in. So where did the rest of the chicken go? So again, you have all kinds of mismatches where you can investigate. Now, the point from the investigative perspective is that no one is going to tell you that these anomalies are money laundering or any specific kind of crime. It can be any of these crimes that you can see here. It could be sanctions busting, money laundering, terrorism finance, fraud, tax evasion, subsidies abuse, corruption, bribery payments, any kind of financial crime. So the point is, we do the investigation on the basis of the red flags, the clues for investigation that we get, we establish the offense, and then we go after the offenders. And in order to do this, we need to fully explore open source information, not just secret intelligence, but also what is available in other languages. And there is software in order to do this kind of searching. But the important thing is that official import and export data can be the starting point, but these are not very clean records. There is a lot of noise. So you need better quality data. So you need to bring together also the records of traders, importers, and exporters. You need to bring in the records of intermediaries, the brokers, and also the records of the shippers and the container owners. You don't need legislation to create this paperwork. All of these have the records on their own. Even havaladars in the bazaar have records. The point is, you need to bring this all together. The pity of it is that we have the software to bring this all together. The data exists, but it is scattered. The software can integrate it and analyze it. And we can train the people so that the human capital can be put in place in order to do the analysis and go after the offenders. There was a period of time, and I spoke with people from ENCLA in Brazil who were using this in cooperation with the United States as well as other Latin American countries, such as the tri-border states, and also Colombia, Mexico, and Panama. So they had so many clues that they had more cases than available people to do these investigations. So we know that this kind of analysis is not theoretically useful, but very practically helpful. So the point is that we need to bring it back again together, because unfortunately, that software that used to be common among financial intelligence units or customs agencies for trade-based money laundering between the countries that I mentioned, Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Panama, and the United States, a different company and a different software is used now, and that cooperative arrangement is not the same. But the software exists. The possibility to do that is real. And it is what we are doing right now is like having a 4K high technology expensive television available, and instead of using it for high quality programs, we watch old black and white movies, and we don't use the granularity and the high quality that our technology allows. So the point is that we need to share these. We need to bring the different actors together. And here is the kind of partners that you need: customs agencies, financial intelligence units, traders, logistics companies, some private companies that want to collaborate with you, research institutions to help with the analysis and also with the capacity building, the training. And you, of course, need a secure environment to protect the data, make sure that it doesn't get leaked and it doesn't get hacked. So when we do this, we will be able to do this properly. If not, it is going to be the current gaps in anti-money laundering that we have, where trade-based, not just money laundering, but all kinds of financial crime is possible, widespread, and costing the taxpayer, the rule of law, justice, and revenue for all countries concerned. So I'll stop here and I will take your questions.
Thanks again, Professor. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And we already have a couple of questions from Ana Cristina Ribeiro, which is from the Brazilian Prosecution Office here in Minas Gerais. She set the following example. Imagine that one may pay a tax fee in the US and intend to pay that using cryptocurrency, using the app Paxful for Bitcoin, for example. After the Bitcoin transaction, how to trace down the owner of the beneficiary account. Let me say, in other words, you have deeply explained the Hawala scheme, which is quite similar to Doleiros in Brazil and other international money laundering schemes. And how do you see that new technologies and crypto assets may sophisticate that models or may adapt that models for cryptocurrencies in order to provide effective ways for international money laundering? How would it mean less traceability? Whether it would be easier or harder to go from noodle to noodle and follow the money on crypto assets used on Hawala or Doleiros? How do you see that?
So I saw that in your program, you have people who are going to be touching a little bit on this. So I do not mean to steal the thunder from them, but let me tell you that it is actually a fact that there is virtually perfect traceability in crypto payments, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on included. So just as there is a network in Hawala payments, and where you have a market that is hierarchical and based on nodes, and the key is to find the information-rich node that wants to cooperate with you and give you the information that you need. A similar kind of process can be followed with existing technologies and multiple available services in order to trace down the transactions and the owners. There is no anonymity. I mean, I can be as bold as this. If people think that engaging in Bitcoin payments gives you anonymity, you are going to be surprised how easy it will be for authorities to track you down. There are specialized companies that do, that's all they do. They do tracking. There is, in other words, traceability, because even if you stay within the crypto space, I mean, there are some very sophisticated payments that you can engage in, where it's going to take a lot of work in order to get to the bottom of it. But even with the development of cryptocurrencies, the kind of volume that it takes for the money laundering or the kinds of things that we are concerned about, those are red flagged a lot more easily. With terrorism finance is different, but when they tried, Hezbollah, for example, trying to do fundraising with cryptos, it was very easy to find them and get them. So anyone who actually uses cryptocurrency as a terrorism fundraiser has been burned. And if they haven't been burned, they're being monitored, right? So the thing is that both official agencies and private companies have the capacity to do the tracing and get down to that. That is even easier when you have the conversion from crypto to fiat currency, because then you get into the conventional Western financial system, where all of these transactions are much more traceable and they can track you down, right? But even the more difficult scenario where you have crypto to crypto kind of payments, even there you are able to get down to the beneficial owner.
I totally agree with you, Professor. And we are currently in the prosecution service in Brazil, improving our analytic capabilities for tracing down crypto assets. And this year we have freezed 2 cases of Pondo schemes, in which we managed to freeze crypto assets. So it's possible to trace down. And in the afternoon, in this international seminar, we will have with us a couple of private sector companies that provide that traceability service, one from the US. So you're right, the institutions and the private sector are improving the ways to trace down crypto assets, and it's not criminalizing the assets itself, but the bad use of cryptocurrency. And we have another question, Professor, if you don't mind. I think we still have a few minutes.
Sure.
As long as the audience is composed mostly by prosecutors and financial investigators, what's the role of multi-jurisdiction cooperation in order to achieve law enforcement results and maybe an effective dissuasive effect on organized crime for money laundering, and how to level the playing field in order to strengthen weaker jurisdictions and avoid jurisdiction shopping? I explain. Using your famous lawful but awful argument of jurisdiction shopping, for our audience, Professor has a very famous book, which is Lawful and Awful. And the argument, one of the key arguments is that organized crime using trade-based schemes choose what jurisdiction would be weaker to implement environmental crimes, tax crimes, and even money laundering. I don't know. What's your perspective from the multi-jurisdiction cooperation of investigators in order to achieve better effects on preventing and combating money laundering?
Well, I think that another concept that you may find practical and useful is that of criminogenic asymmetries that make crime easier by creating opportunities, motives to take advantage of criminal opportunities and weaken controls. So legal asymmetry is one example, when you have, or administrative asymmetries, where one jurisdiction has tough laws, a lot of capacity, and others do not. And then you can have jurisdiction shopping and route your transactions through places that you can more easily escape. So it's a facilitative kind of condition. So the response here is that international cooperation is absolutely essential. One way to promote this cooperation is to reduce these asymmetries: harmonization of criminal laws, harmonization of capacity, harmonization of practices, and political will in order to get things done. Now, the problem is also that even when these things are there, or we're getting close to there, we're never going to have a perfect world, but we can have a better one, right? So it is all about how do we improve on where we are now. The mutual legal assistance process is the traditional one to do that, but it's very bureaucratic, very slow, and in contemporary situations, inadequate, because by the time you get some response or action, it's too late. Money has vanished, people have disappeared. So what you need is a speedier way of collaborating. My recommendation is to make fuller use of existing international instruments, such as the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, the UN Convention Against Corruption, and related ones, such as Medicrime Convention of the Council of Europe for medical frauds and counterfeits and falsified medical products and so on, or terrorism finance, because these, especially the conventions against transnational organized crime and corruption, are ratified by the overwhelming majority of countries. So what you have is a legal basis on which you can collaborate with each other. You don't, in other words, need to resort to the mutual legal assistance process. What matters is to find ways that this collaboration can take place. In order to use the UNCAC, the Corruption Convention, what you need to find is a corruption offense, which is charged as the basis for the collaboration. That is the ideal way, because the dual criminality principle is very relaxed under the UNCAC, and you can also have the voluntary provision of legal assistance, even in the absence of dual criminality. In other words, if I want to help somebody in Brazil, even if there is no request from Brazil, even if we do not have the same criminal laws on this side, on my part, I can actually provide this assistance directly, person to person. So helping the bonding, the connections between prosecutors and investigative agencies on a personal level is actually quite important. Under the UNTOC, the organized crime one, there are 3 conditions that you must meet in order to use it as a legal basis. Either you have money laundering or organized criminal group crossing borders, obstruction of justice or corruption, but you can use it for any serious crime. So you have to have a serious crime, which means punishable by 4 years or more in prison. Secondly, committed by an organized criminal group of 3 people or more for profit. And 3, it crosses borders. Victims, transactions, or offenders operate in more than one jurisdiction. If these 3 conditions are met, then you can use that as a legal basis for mutual legal assistance, regardless of what the underlying offense is. So the creative use of these instruments is fundamental. It's an asset, it's a tool that is underutilized right now, but Brazil, like just a few island countries, Sudan and so on, or North Korea, have not ratified these. The world has ratified them. You can work with any jurisdiction if you so wish, but you have to have these conditions met.
Professor Passas, we are just in time, so I really appreciate your availability and enthusiasm to share with us your perspectives. And I will share with the audience that more than a great professor and academic and thinker, you are a great football player, which is important in Brazil, and captain of the International Anti-Corruption staff team, which
I know that football, football and Brazil actually has a special place in my heart also for that reason. But there was one other thing that I wanted to mention on international cooperation. Sometimes it is about also capacity building. Sometimes it's about interpreting, finding the right questions, finding the right answers, doing the right analysis of the available information. I have actually worked very often with international teams to make sense of records of criminal organizations or legitimate ones, to see which transactions are legitimate, which are suspicious, and what can we tell from the records about the mental state, the intent of the operators. So that's another way to promote international cooperation. If we get to cooperate well, maybe I will come to Minas Gerais and we can have a football game.
That would be my pleasure. Maybe next time, Professor, next year we'll have another international seminar. I know you have a lot of perspectives to share with us. And maybe if the COVID-19 pandemic allows us, we'll have a meeting in person, and then we can arrange a international football game, a football match, so we can play together. Professor, one more time, we really appreciate your passion, your enthusiasm, and your knowledge that you are always available to share with us. Thank you very much. And para os demais participantes, nós voltaremos à tarde. Com muito orgulho, nós tivemos a oportunidade de ouvir o professor Nikos Passas, que é um acadêmico muito relevante na área de corrupção, de investigação de transações internacionais, de lavagem de dinheiro transnacional, e é uma honra recebê-lo, e quem sabe na próxima vez conseguimos um campeonato de futebol internacional com o professor Passas como um dos capitões do time quem sabe até do Ministério Público de Minas Gerais. Professor,
é um prazer. Muito obrigado.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bom dia.
Take care.